Well, there's an old saying, says something like, you can't go back home again. And while you were gone, and believe it or not, again, it took me totally by surprise. If you're gone for 6 months or more before coming back to your home country, you would be surprised how little things will change in the 6 months or a year that you're gone, and you will get accustomed to certain things in the Philippines that are very different and almost take getting used to. It's kind of a shock when you get back to your home country. Now, one of the first things I noticed was that during my first year and a half in the Philippines, I had gotten a motorbike. I had never had one before, didn't know how to ride one. I learned out in the province roads, eventually made my way to riding around town. And, so that became a new thing for me. And riding around the Philippines, it's kind of loosey-goosey. And in a bad way, you have to really be alert driving around in the Philippines because there's really not a whole lot of education going on when it comes to the rules of the road and how to merge properly and just you name it. So you really got to pay attention. Now, when I went back to the States, immediately I realized the difference between driving in the United States, especially California, versus driving in the Philippines. And the difference was this anxiety that I had. Now, in my previous business, I was mobile. I was on the road a lot. And it was a constant anxiety that I just got used to. I think we all do. And it's that the traffic laws are going to be enforced. So if you don't make the full stop, if you don't turn your signal on before your turn, if you make an unsafe merge, a lane change, any of that, if you're so much as going 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, you're going to get a ticket. In the Philippines, you really don't worry about getting pulled over. The enforcement is more like a checkpoint once in a while. I mean, that's maybe once a month you're going to encounter that. Somebody does something wacky on the road, an unsafe lane change, unsafe passing, whatever, you name it. I've seen them go through pedestrian lines with pedestrians in the walk line. And usually there's not a police officer around. And even if there was, it's just sort of like, well, nobody got hurt. Don't worry about it. So one of the things you'll encounter going back to, I'll just say the United States in my case, is just this anxiety. I was like looking in the rearview mirror and, are the cops behind me? And did I check my mirror? Did I pick up my phone while I was driving? Just, you got to keep track of all this stuff. And you're kind of out of practice with that. The second big thing that, again, it's been more pronounced in the last 5 years, is sticker shock. You come to the Philippines and you can get a pretty decent meal, dinner, for what works out to be about $5-6. But as you know, try doing that in the United States. Most places, you walk into anywhere from Denny's to Applebee's to whatever. And, you're lucky if you get out with a bill less than $12-14. And many times it's going to be up to $18, again, depending on where you go and what you eat. And it's not just restaurants, it's everything. I get groceries when I'm usually visiting there with my folks. And every time I go to the grocery store, it seems like I'm spending $50 to $100. And I'm just getting some bananas and seltzer water, just kind of odds and ends. And, it's amazing how quickly it adds up. Because here in the Philippines, I'll go to the grocery store. I always get 2 grocery bags at a time just because it fits in my backpack and on my motorbike. And I usually spend maybe about somewhere between $35 and $50. I can't think of a time I spent more than like $80 going to the grocery store. So sticker shock on just about everything. Gasoline prices, groceries, restaurants, you name it. It all just goes way up. 2 years ago, I hired a shuttle, and it was a very nice outfit, brand new SUVs, all that stuff. And I hired a service to pick me up to take me to the airport. Now, I'm about 90 miles or so from LAX, so several years ago, it was like 2.5 years ago, I believe I paid right about $230 one way to get me to LAX. And then I gave the guy like a $25 tip or something. But I was going to go ahead and use the same service recently, about 2 months ago. And the same vehicle, everything, their starting price was $500. And it was the same company, same distance, but it literally went up more than 100%. And they said, well, this is the estimate. We'll give you the exact amount once we determine this and that. That was their quote, So I just didn't go with them. It turned out to be cheaper to just get an Uber. And the Uber actually showed up with a very nice SUV. I don't know the names of these cars, but it was very nice. It was like, he said it was something like a stretch SUV or something. And it was just me. It wasn't a bunch of people. It was just me. Really great guy, great driver. Anyways, so even the shuttle prices to get a ride to the airport, expect those to be a lot higher as well. Another thing that I encountered was the difference in social interaction with strangers when you're out in public. And in the Philippines, it's very normal. Everywhere you go, the businesses, the cashiers, the box boys, the store clerks, security guards, everybody you run into, they'll address you as, if you're a man, they'll say, oh, good morning, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you, sir? It's all very polite. And even when you're talking to other strangers that are not, working capacity, let's say, you got to just stop somebody at the mall and say something like, hey, I'm looking for the whatever restaurant. It's supposed to be here in the mall. Can you tell me where it's at? And usually they'll stop and they'll just, it's no big deal. And maybe they know, maybe they don't. But I had come back, like I said, after 18 months in the Philippines, and I was in a Walmart and I was checking out, looking for cargo shorts. And you know how it is, the aisles where they have the clothes, they might have these little island things and the path kind of zigzags, And so I was just standing there looking at cargo shorts. And so there was not much room, for somebody to pass by behind me. So I'm not moving. And this guy, I don't know, he was about 28 years old. He walks behind me, and then, with his shoulder, he accidentally bumped my shoulder. I didn't even think anything of it. It's like, I know it's a confined space. You're going to bump into somebody, no big deal. But right away, the guy went like on the defense. He was like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bump you. I'm sorry. And I was like, calm down. People are just so paranoid. It's like you stop something now. Again, I'm talking about California. Maybe it's different. Maybe if you're out there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or somewhere in the Midwest, maybe it's a whole lot friendlier. But coming back to California, I then realized just how paranoid everybody is. I walked up to somebody just to ask them what time it is. I haven't worn a watch since I was 18. And so I went ahead and I just asked somebody, I didn't feel like even looking at my phone. And I was just like, hey, excuse me, I was going to ask them what time it was. And right away, they backed up, kind of like sizing me up, sizing up the situation. Is he going to rob me? Is he, is he going to try to convert me to his religion? What's going on here? Just paranoia. And I understand it, but you don't encounter that in the Philippines. Like I said, you can walk up to a complete stranger in the Philippines, man, woman, whatever, and, it's just a friendly interaction, It was really a weird contrast to encounter that coming back to the United States. When I go back to the States, I'm there just on vacation. And so when I do go into town, one thing that struck me was just, again, I won't call it anxiety, but it's just a sense of urgency. You go back and everybody else is doing something. They're rushing to work, or they're getting off work and they're going to the gym, or they're going here, they're going there. Everybody seems to be going somewhere. And there's just sort of this more frantic pace. Whereas when you go into town, here in the Philippines and you bump into, it could be an expat, it could be a Filipino. Everybody's got all day for everything, which is a good and a bad thing. People are just sort of relaxed. They're not in any big hurry. Yeah, maybe they got to get their groceries, or maybe they're on the way to the movie cinema, but it's all pretty relaxed. Everybody seems relaxed. Now, that's kind of a bummer when you're in a hurry and you want to get through the cashier line, and then turns out the person ahead of you, they happen to know the cashier. It's like, oh, Auntie so-and-so, how are you doing? And I'm like, can we do this some other time? I want to get out of here, So you just have to kind of put your brakes on and just chill out and take things at a slower pace in the Philippines. I've had this happen at the bank as well. But in the States, that was one big difference I noticed, is everything is like bam, bam, bam. It's like move, 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 and that's a good thing. Nowadays you can get in and out of the DMV pretty efficiently, actually. So that was another thing I noticed, was just I didn't realize what a fast pace we operate on until I was away from it and came back. Another thing that really stuck out to me, and I think it's a good thing, is when you're in the Philippines, you're in a culture where, let's just say roughly, 20% of the people that are Filipinos, they can afford to do luxurious spending. Basically buy things just for the hell of it, whatever. I would say 80% are more on, they're watching their budget, paycheck to paycheck. You find that in the Philippines, a lot of the things that we might waste money on are not here. They're usually imported, and there's not as much of it. And so I won't say that the Philippines is less materialistic. That really doesn't apply. But it's just that you get used to learning how to live with what you need. Even as an expat, I only buy things when I really need them. As long as my coffee maker was still working, I didn't buy a new one. And then I was like, this is getting kind of, inefficient. So, I bought a new one. I had a mini blender that was working for like 5 years, but then it got a little crack and it was leaking. And I was like, okay, I'll go get a new mini blender. And, so you learn in the Philippines to just buy stuff when you really need it, and maybe it's because if you're on a motorcycle, it's, the first thing I think of is how big is the box? Can I fit it on the motorbike? So it's like, there's already a step ahead. Like, do I really need this? Or can I just go on Lazada and just have it shipped? We do that a lot now. But in the United States, for instance, I went back one time in November before Thanksgiving, so I could be there for Thanksgiving with the family. And the day after Thanksgiving, of course, is Black Friday. And everybody's like, I see them on the news. They're getting up, at 2 a.m. They're lining up outside the stores to buy appliances and gifts and stuff. To me, I look at that and it's just lunacy. It's just a whole consumer mindset on steroids. It's just nuts. And Black Friday is a pretty stark example. But even throughout the rest of the year, I just observe the kind of things that are around people's houses. Much of it is like excess. It's just, I remember going to one guy's house and he took me out to the garage to show him this Bowflex he had bought or something years ago. And it was all covered with dust and it had other stuff hanging on it. And in the garage, it was like a warehouse of stuff that you would see on those cable channels, where they show a product. It's like, hey, buy it in the next 20 minutes. You'll get this special price, whatever. And he was just this impulse buyer that was just, he had all kinds of stuff. He had like Cuisinarts and, Ginsu knives and all kinds of crap. And it was all in the garage. He wasn't even using it. It was just piling up, And again, in the Philippines, especially if you're a single guy, you want to keep your footprint small. You want to be a minimalist. You want to be able to pack everything you have into one suitcase, preferably a carry-on, and a backpack. That's it. Really, you don't need a lot of stuff. You only need about a week's worth of clothes, and then you have a laundry service take care of it, or you buy new clothes or whatever. But you really don't need a lot of stuff. And you realize that by being something of a minimalist, you find that you can just say to yourself, well, I'm staying at this Airbnb in Bacolod, but I want to go check out Iloilo. And so you finish out your time, and then you just hop on a plane and you go. But if you've got boxes of stuff, moving around just isn't really that fun of a experience. So I went back to the States, and like I said, it was just mind-boggling to me how much money people just, from my perspective now, they just sort of piss it away, on things that, like I said, I buy stuff because I need it, and once in a while I'll buy something I really want because I think of it as an enhancement to just my joy of life. I didn't need a drone. I got one, but I didn't blow $2,000 on one. I just got one for $85, and I just kind of fly it around as a goof just once in a while, just to have fun with it. But for the most part, I just can't rationalize just sort of pissing away money and then buying stuff and then having it lay around the house. And so you see things differently after living a bit more of a simpler, mobile, minimalist lifestyle, again, for say 6 months or more in the Philippines. And then you go back and you're like, man, why do people buy all this stuff? In fact, I went to a mall there in Temecula. Some of you are probably familiar with it. And I walked through the mall after that 18 months, and I was amazed. I went walking down one aisleway after another aisleway, going to the next floor, looking at all these stores, and all I kept saying was, there's nothing in that store I need. Oh, there's nothing in that store I need. It was like Bed Bath & Beyond. I'm not the kind of guy that just buys a bunch of towels and soaps. There's nothing in there that I need. And then I would walk a little further, and it's like designer t-shirts or a store that sells nothing but Vans tennis shoes or something. It's just, I walked through that whole store, and the only part of the mall that I really still found useful was the food court and the cinema. That's pretty much it. Everything else to me was just useless. I'm like on this, I've been trying to eat healthier and all that. I started with keto. Now I'm doing carnivore diet. So the C's Candy Shop and the place that sells nothing but fruit smoothies, which, by the way, you may as well drink a soda if you're going to drink a fruit smoothie. There was just everything in that mall. To me, I don't need it. And I'm surprised that these stores stay open, when the only thing they sell is women's shoes and nothing in there is under $150 a pair. I don't know. I don't get it. So there are other things, but these are the main ones that really stuck out to me and on one more is your old friends. They could be previous workmates, co-workers. They could be friends you grew up with. You come back and you have this whole other perspective on life, and they can't relate to it. You're talking about walking barefoot on a beautiful tropical beach and, kicking back and getting a massage on the sand and then having a nice meal under coconut trees. Whatever your experience is, dating younger women and just having a great time. And they just kind of look at you like, either is this guy lying or I can't fathom that, And so in a way, these friends that you were very close with before, because you had all these things in common. You worked at the same place, you maybe went to the same gym and whatever. Well, now you're living a life, an experience that they cannot relate to. The only way they could understand it is if they went to the Philippines, and then they could go, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So there's sort of this little degree of separation that happens when you've experienced the Philippines. And same thing applies with Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. Just living abroad in a completely different paradigm they can't relate to it. And I had one person tell me, as I was just kind of telling them about how excited I was, a year and a half in the Philippines, and I was dating and I was traveling and I was seeing all these interesting places. And at the end of it, they said, it's like you're describing a movie I'm never going to watch, you know? And they just couldn't relate to it. So love to hear your thoughts on in what ways you've run into this. Being in the Philippines 6 months or more, coming back home, and then realizing you see it with a whole different set of eyes. So see you there in the comments.